Okay, so we will be recording this session. This is the tutorial or class explanation rather for lab exercise number one. What we're going to be doing in lab exercise number one is that we're going to be explaining, demonstrating, showing how to create a database in Microsoft Access based upon the relational model that we have of a database. And remembering that the relational model is going to be the set of tables, normalized tables, that we have obtained from doing the whole process, from the whole design process, okay? The example we're going to be using for these lab exercises is the SOSA Corp example. So just remembering that we had defined the SOSA Corp example as the SOSA Corp is a global company that does stuff for people. Uh, the company wants to manage the information relating its employees, departments, as well as different projects. Um, we had some requirements here that were defined. The company is organized in departments. Each department has a unique identifier. There's an employee in charge of the department. There's also a registry where the employees, when the employees started managing the department. A department manages projects. Each employee has a social security number and a series of data associated to them. Uh, Employees manage the employees. The number of hours a week an employee works on a project is registered, and employees have dependents, mostly for insurance purposes. And so each dependent also has some information and is related to an employee. We had identified 4 entities: employee, department, project, and dependent. We had defined relationships between these entities that are shown there. We had also defined cardinality for the relationships. We see there that we have the different cardinalities assigned for each relationship we have. Some of them are N-to-1, 1-to-1, 1 N, N to M, etc. This is the kind of the summary of the relationships. We have to remember that the relationships are going to give us some guidelines regarding the tables. And so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 relationships that are one to many, 1 relationship that's 1-to-1, and 1 relationship that's many to many. We had defined or identified the attributes for each of the entities. We had identified the primary keys or attributes that would be good primary keys, and identified the dependent was a weak entity because it didn't have a primary key. And then we had done the global ER diagram that kind of shows us the different entities that we have and their relationships. From that, we had extracted the tables that comprise our relational model. So we've got 4 tables: employee, department, project, and dependent. Each of these has their attributes, and we identified the attributes with a specific nomenclature. And also, depending on the type of relationship, if it was a 1-to-1 relationship, we could either merge the tables or put the primary keys on each of the tables. If it was a 1-to-N relationship, what we did is that we grabbed the attributes of the 1 and we put it in the N. If it was a many-to-many relationship, we created a new table with both primary keys combined. And so this is what we have here. And notice that we have the table employee project that has, it's because we have a many-to-many relationship between employees and projects. So this is a new table that grabs both primary keys and adds whatever new attributes we want. And basically this is what we have, okay? We also connect the relationships. And how do we connect them? We connect them by the attributes that are common. And it's usually the primary keys. We put those underscored and in bold, and underscored are others that are the foreign keys that are included in another table. Okay. Lastly, we've got, here's the description of the attribute. So we've got a description of attributes where we explain what each attribute is. And so this is the SOSA Corp example that we want to implement in Microsoft Access. So from now on, we're going to really focus on this slide and this slide. Okay, so I'm going to be jumping from Microsoft Access to these slides because they're going to be the reference of what we're going to do in Microsoft Access. And actually, the end result of this first lab exercise is that we have to have this. We have to have this relational model implemented in Access. We're actually going to look at it kind of this way. Okay. Remember, if anybody has a question or comment, please go ahead and do so. And remember that beginning this point, I encourage you to try to follow along what I'm going to be doing from now on using Access. So the first step is that we are going to open Microsoft. We're going to open Microsoft Access. Okay. And so I'm going to do that. Let me just share my screen here. We're going to open Microsoft Access. And so what we're going to have here when we open Microsoft Access is that, first of all, we're going to be asked about creating a database or opening an existing database or bringing in a database model from we might find elsewhere on the web. So what we're going to be doing now is that we're going to create a new database, and it's going to be a blank database. Okay. Now, something that's very important from now on, remember, you're not going to be working on one file, you're working on a project in this software. What's the difference between working with files and working with projects in a software or in an integrated development environment? When you're working on a file, it's just one file that contains certain specific information about something. It's like when you programmed in Java or you do a program in MATLAB or whatever, you've got a script that's one file that contains the code. If you do, maybe if you do a drawing in AutoCAD, you're going to have a file that has your AutoCAD drawing in it. It might also be a project. But the difference with a project is that actually a project is going to be comprised by a lot of information that's integrated into a file or a set of files that a software can interpret and organize, and you can work with these. So from now on, we're going to be working on a project. And so I'm going to create a blank database, a new database. So we're going to click here on blank desktop database. Oops, give me a moment. I did something I didn't want to do. Close this. And I'm going to open it up again. Okay. I'm going to click on blank desktop database. What I did there is that I double clicked it. Try to be careful to just click it once. Why? This is one of the little details with Microsoft Access is that when I double clicked it, notice that it already opened the environment, but it didn't ask me for a name. So the thing about Microsoft Access is that you start working on the project without giving names to anything. And it's preferable to start giving the names from the beginning. Oh, by the way, I'm using the latest version I have of Microsoft Access, which I believe is the 2000, from the Microsoft Office 360. It might be that you have a different version of Microsoft Access. That's not a problem, actually. Just remember that try to use the latest version, which is the one we gave you in the Microsoft 360. And just remember to not use a very, very old version of Microsoft Access because maybe some functionality might not work. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to create a blank desktop database. And so the first thing I'm going to name it, I'm going to call this SOSA Corp 2021 JSL V1. The V1, it's going to be V1, V2, V3, V4, corresponds to each of the lab exercises. So SOSA Corp 2021 JSL V1 is going to be what we do in lab exercise 1. There's going to be another for lab exercise 2 that's going to be V2. That's actually going to be built or going to continue what we've done from the previous one, but I want you to be able to see each step. So this is going to be called V1. By default, it's going to store it in your documents file. I'm going to actually change that in my case, and I'm going to save it over here in the folder. It's called 2021, and I'm going to save it there. Now, this is very important. Notice that it's creating this file that has a file ending ACCDB. That file extension means that it's a Microsoft Access database project. That's what you're going to turn in when you turn in your lab exercises in your final project. Now, again, we're doing the deliverables via Google Drive because this file is going to be growing. It's going to be getting large. It's going to be larger as we advance because we're going to be adding things to the database. And even when we add data to it, it's going to get larger. So that's why we're going to be doing it that way. So I'm going to define it here and I'm going to click create. Remember, if anybody has any questions, please please raise your hands using the raise hand icon and or just unmute your mics and go for it. Okay, now what do we see here? Now we have a canvas here which is the integrated development environment and where we're going to start working. This is important. The first thing that we have here, notice that here on this section here on the left-hand side is very important. So please be mindful to not minimize it or close it by accident and then not be able to find it. Because everything we do regarding the database, the tables we create, the reports, the queries, et cetera, is going to be shown here in a sort of tree structure. And that's where we're going to be referencing to find the different things that we're going to be doing in the database. Okay, so that's going to be useful. Right now, what do we have? We just have a table that's called table 1. The blank database doesn't have anything on it. It just has a table. Now, right now, this table is shown here. What does this look like? What is this? If you see this here, what does this look like? Can somebody tell me? What other Microsoft tool do we have that this kind of looks like?
It looks kind of like Excel.
Yeah, correct. It kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet, right? And actually, that's kind of what it's showing here because this view, this is the default view that the tables are shown. The default view is called the data sheet view. This view that we're seeing here, this is the data sheet view. And the data sheet view is actually the view of the table where we have the information. Okay. Remember in the exercises we did and in the exam that when we did the normalization exercises that I gave you a table with information in it, that would be this view. That would be this view. So if we had information right now, if we had data, it would be here, kind of like, it would look like an Excel spreadsheet. It's the data sheet view. It's where we're going to see the data that's contained within the table. Right now, we don't have any data there because we just created it. Now, the other thing here is that by default, it's called table 1. It hasn't asked me to be able to modify that. I actually can't rename this table if I want because it's open. That's one thing in Microsoft Access. I can't change the name of something while it's open. Okay, so this is the data sheet view. We're not going to be using this view to create the database. We need to use the design view. So how do we do that? We're going to go over here to the left-hand side, and there's an icon here that says view. And right now it's the data sheet view that's selected. We're going to go over here and select the design view. Click. Once we do that, it's going to ask us for a name for the table. Now, we're going to start creating our database. Now, just confirm something for me, please. When I do this, You guys can see that I'm switching the screen
Yes.
from Access to the SOSA Corp, right? Okay,
Yes.
good. So I'm going to start creating this model here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to start creating the tables. So I'm going to go in order. I'm going to do this one first. I'm going to create the employee table first. Okay. And I'm going to be switching from Access to the PowerPoint because I'm going to have to see information there. And please, if you guys can help me out with the attributes, then that would be extremely useful for me. Okay, so if you guys could have this screen open and or this screen or this slide open and help me out filling in things, I would really appreciate that, and that would show me that you guys are still there and paying attention. So I'm going to start off with the employee table. So I'm going to switch over to Access. This first table is going to be the employee table. I'm going to call it employee. And suddenly I'm switched. Now I'm in the design view. In the design view, I am going to be able to fill in here all of the fields or attributes that I need in that table. Okay. So I'm literally going to be filling in these here. But I want the complete information. So actually, what I'm going to be filling in is this, because I'm also going to want the description. So please, if you guys can have this slide open and you can follow along and also help me out with that, with this, we're going to make this actually much quicker. So what's the first field that I've got in my table?
Employee social security number.
Correct. So I'm literally going to write this down, EMP-SSN. Okay. Now, notice one thing. What do I have here right next to the first attribute? What's this icon that you see here?
A key.
It's a key. Correct. So by default, when I create my first table, remember that normalization and what we talked about, all of the tables have to have a primary key. So by default, when I open a new table, the first row or field is they're gonna access it, tell me that should be your primary key. So I'm gonna say employee social security number. That's the field name. Now the data type, we haven't talked about data types. We have to define a data type. So right now for this example, if I click here, I'm gonna have all of the different data types that I can use. I'm sorry, data types when we're programming. Remember when you were doing programming last semester, that you had data types like numbers, text, etc. Well, here is the type of data that we're going to be using. It's very important for the data to be congruent. Now, this first one that's set here by default, it's called auto number. It's usually the default one that Access puts there to identify or define keys. What is auto number? Auto number is going to be a data type that's going to start off in 0. And every time I add a new registry, it's going to consecutively increase that number to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, automatic. It's going to be unique. Right now, for this example, I'm going to leave it as auto number. But for the ones you're going to be doing in the lab exercises, you can define it as auto number, or if you have a format for the primary key that you've defined, then you can select either number or text, however you're going to do it. For now, I'm going to leave it as auto number. What is this field? What is the description? What is that? This first one, EMP-SSN, what is that?
The social security number, did we just say that?
Okay, so yes, so this is important. So from now on, and this is actually going to deduct points if you don't do it. So Access says that this field is optional, okay? SOSA says that this field, that this is mandatory. So from now on, when we're creating an attribute, I need to see the description there, okay? We need to add the description, please. Now, this is important, you guys, in design. You have no idea how problematic it is when you have to modify a design or update a design from a database for anything, any sort of design in engineering, and the design isn't correctly and clearly documented. It's a real pain in the butt to do that if you have a design and that's not completely documented. So I'm going to please ask you to always add the description, employee social security number. Because right now, for example, we see this attribute EMP SSN and we kind of say that it's employee social security number, right? I had a student many, many years ago that he was an amazing programmer. He was an amazing programmer. This guy was really good as a programmer. Thing is, he was one of these people that are very good at something technical, but they're so good that they don't worry about the little details because they're doing the design and they understand it and the design is very well done, but they're not really worried about other people understanding things, right? If I gave you this as engineers, oops, sorry about that. If I gave you this relational model as engineers, would you roughly understand what the problem is about because of the names I'm putting it here? I think so. You might not need more details, but you know that it's employee, department, project, dependent, and you've got nomenclature that kind of gives you an idea of what things are. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, now imagine the following. Instead of calling the primary key EMP SSN, I'm gonna call it Goku. Does anybody know what Goku is?
Yes, but it has nothing to do with the database.
No, but share with us, Ricardo, because I think the rest of this group is so cool that they don't know anime, and they're like, eh. But what is Goku, Ricardo?
He's just an anime character that appears on a lot of memes, and he's very iconic.
Yeah, he's an anime character, correct, from Dragon Ball, and he's iconic. Well, this student that I'm mentioning was a huge fan of anime. And so his designs were very, very good. He was a very good programmer, but all of his variables were named like anime characters. So his variables were Goku, Ranma, Seiya. And so that was fine for him. He knew what the heck Goku meant in his design, but if you tried to grab that design and tried to understand it, you had no idea what that meant. And so it's very important to document. As engineers, it's very important for you to document things because you are not necessarily going to be always modifying your own designs. And believe me, when you have to modify designs of other people that aren't correctly documented, you're going to know that that's a real headache. So EMP SSN. What's the next attribute?
The name.
Employee name. Okay, correct. Remember that you can also follow along and you can do that. So EMP name. The data type, there's two options here for text, the short text and the long text. We can leave this as short text. What's the difference between the short text and the long text? The short text is short and the long text is long. Meaning short text is like a name. Jorge Sosa Lopez is a short text. This, for example, this here that's written here in the bottom, this is a long text. A long text is sort of like a paragraph. So we can leave that there, and that's going to be the employee name. What's up next? Employee address. For example, employee address, we might put that as a long text, okay? Then we've got
Employee salary.
Employee salary. What data type is employee salary going to be?
Numbers?
Number.
We've got a couple of options here. We can put it as numbers,
Or
or
symbols?
Would be correct.
or we could use correct. We could use currency if we want. Okay.
Yeah, we
We
have
could
the
use, yeah, we could use numbers. We could use currency. I'm going to leave currency here, and it's going to be employee salary. Oh, by the way, forgot to mention, and this is a good example. Notice that there's a table here on the bottom. This is specific information about the data type and the field that we can modify. So for example, for this one that I defined here, that's employee salary, that's currency, I can actually define how many decimal places I want. Okay. If I want a default value. Okay. If I even want to align the text. Validation rule, we're going to talk about this later on, but for example, in the database, when I'm putting information in, let's say that we're talking about Samuel. Samuel, are you there?
Yes.
Samuel, let's say that I'm filling in your information as an employee. And I write that your salary is minus 10,000 pesos a month. Would you agree with that?
Not really.
What would that mean if I put that your salary is minus 10,000 pesos for this company?
Well, I would understand that I'm losing 10,000 pesos.
You would be working for my company and you would have to be paying me for work. Is it clear, Samuel, that minus 10,000 pesos is not a valid data
Yes.
for this? Well, I can add validation rules if I want. So I can say for this field, it can only be these values. If it's a value out, or another thing, Samuel, would you agree if your salary were 50 million pesos a month?
Yes.
I shouldn't have been there. Of course you would, but I'm the CEO of the company. I would not agree with that. So the salary might have to have a cap. So eventually, we're going to talk about that later on, but we can actually add validation rules for the attribute, for the field, if we want to check that. Thank you, someone. These are things to consider when you're looking for a job. What's the next attribute that we've got there on the list, the next field?
Employee gender.
Oh, this is going to be an interesting one. Employee gender. Now, for employee gender, I'm going to do something different for employee gender. I want options for the employee gender because I don't want somebody to, I could say that the employee gender is short text, but I don't want somebody to write something that isn't congruent with the field. So I want to limit it to certain options. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to go down here to this option that says lookup wizard. Microsoft Access is kind of like, and the Microsoft people are like, they're probably Harry Potter fans, but they love to have wizards. A wizard in software is something that's going to help you out to magically do things without you having to do them manually. So I'm going to go here to the lookup wizard. And what's going to appear is this option here. There's two options. One, it says, I want the lookup field to get values from another table or query. We're not going to use that one right now. We're going to use that one later on. And later on, we're going to explain why. We're going to use the second one that says, I will type in the values that I want. Okay. We're going to click next. And it's going to give me the options of values that I'm going to include here in the gender. Okay. So, give me a moment here. Okay, so I'm going to add here the possible values that I'm going to add for the gender. So I'm going to say male, I'm going to say female, I'm going to say transgender male, I'm going to say transgender female, I'm going to say non-conformant, I'm going to say other, and I'm going to say prefer to not disclose. Okay, just trying to be a little as politically correct as possible. Next, so those are the options that I'm giving for this field. The difference with the other fields that we defined up to this point is that for the other fields, I can literally put anything I want and the auto number is going to be created automatically. But for this field, I'm specifying the values I want the user to provide. and are going to be those. So we're going to put this.
Professor,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Will it show up if they're wrong so the user will type this in and it has to be the word male or female?
Oh,
all in
good.
cap,
No,
or-
good question. Good question, Ricardo. Okay, so right now what we're doing, Ricardo, is just defining characteristics of the field. We haven't designed a form. That's going to be the next lab exercise. We need to design a form where the user is going to provide the data. In that form, we're going to think about, okay, what's the best way that a user can provide that field? Probably with a drop-down box. Would you agree?
What's
The
the drop-down box?
drop-down box is kind of like, a drop-down box is what is this here.
Okay.
You see when we're selecting here, we have this, and you notice that it's
okay.
not letting-
Okay, it's like a multiple choice question. Got it.
So you notice that when we do that, I can only select what is provided. Well, when we design the form, we're going to say, I want to drop down menu with
Got it.
only these values. And I'm not going to allow the person to put text. Why?
Got it.
Because you hit it on the nail. Maybe I'm going to write down something that isn't valid, and that's going to mess things up. Okay. So when we create the forms, we're going to have to think about those things. Okay. How am I going to provide the input form so the user doesn't make a mistake or doesn't give me information that I don't want? Okay, so that's a good question. Right now, we're just defining the characteristics. We're going to address those issues in lab exercise 2 when we're designing the forms. Okay, so we're going to go to the next screen. It's asking me if I want to change the name of the, what label I want for that field. I'm going to leave the same name. For example, this also goes to the question you asked, Ricardo. It's got an option that says limit to list. What does this mean? It's only going to be the values of the list. The user can't add another value that's different from the list that I provided. Okay. And the rest I'm going to leave as it is. And I'm going to click finish. Okay. And so now this one has the field properties that I provided. Okay. Now we're going to go over here to what's the next one?
It's employee birth date.
Employee birth date. B date. And the employee birth date, there's an option here for date time. Oh, whoops, I didn't put here employee salary and employee.
It's gender, Professor.
Oh, yep. Thank you. Good catch. Employee gender. And then over here, thank you. Employee birth date. And that's I'm gonna put that as a date time format. Then the next one is employee. There was a field here that told us or just marked if the employee was a manager or not. That's going to be a yes or no. And actually we have a data type, a Boolean data type that's a yes, no data type that we can add for those situations where the field is just Boolean. It's either yes or no. So this is going to be employee manager. Yes, employee manager. Yes, no. Then the next field is the employee manager start date. That was another thing. If the employee is a manager, then we're going to have a start date. Employee manager start date. And next, we've got a couple of fields that are going to be related to other tables. And we're going to see how to relate them in a minute. So we're going to have department ID. This is going to be a number. And it's going to be the department ID where employee works. And then the employee social security number of their supervisor. Okay. because remember that the employees can supervise other employees. I'm going to leave that also as a number. Employee supervisor. Employee supervisor social security number. Okay. I think those are all of the fields, right? Yep. Okay.
Yes.
Something that's very important, you guys, that I actually wasn't doing here because I was going through the exercise and I already have it completed, to save your data. Okay, so remember to do a control S to save. Okay, because if you continue working, the only way that Access is going to ask you to save the table is if you close the table. So if I close the table, that's when it asks me to save it. But if we're going to notice that once I open an object, it's going to stay open unless I close it. And I can have many objects open at the same time. And if I don't close it or specifically save it, I'm not saving the changes. Okay, so remember to do that.
Professor, I got a question.
Yes, go ahead. Let me just.
Um,
Yes, go ahead. Who's asking?
Carmina.
Carmina, go ahead.
So we have the primary key for employee social security number, right?
Yes.
And then at the attributes, we have the department ID and the employee essential. Those are primary keys too for other tables.
Yes.
So we don't put the primary key, right? Or
No, that's a good question, Carmina. That's going to be one of the next steps. Right now, you stated it correctly. Employee social security number is the primary key of this table. Department ID and employee social security number, in this case, I'm going to focus on department ID, is a primary key of another table. So first, we're going to create all of the tables. And once we create all the tables, the next step is that we're going to link them using their common the keys. When we do that, that's when this is going to happen, that it's going to be identified as a foreign key. Okay, but that's a further step. Okay, but we are going to do that once we create all of the tables. Okay, is that clear, Carmina?
yes, it's because I was doing the table and I wanted to put that as a primary key just to see what happened, but we can only have one primary key on
Yes.
the table, right?
Yes, it's important, and that's part of the normalization. We can only have one. So these are foreign keys that are primary keys of other tables, and we're going to reference those in a moment. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to close this. Okay, I'm going to open it again just so you guys can see something. Notice something here. I double-clicked on the table. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to double-click on the table, and it opens again, but notice that it's opening in the datasheet view. Now we have all the fields, and I can fill in information. And notice this. Notice that employee salary has a currency format. Employee manager has a checkbox. Notice what happens when I check this box. It automatically interpreted that I created a field, and what happened? It assigned a number, an automatic, and then it created a new row. This is like the datasheet view that, like Ricardo mentioned, it's kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. This is where we can add information. And also notice that in the case of employee gender, notice here that I've got the options. And I can select any of these if I want. But right now we're in the datasheet view. This is sort of the manual way of providing information. This isn't the way the user is going to provide information. That's going to be through a form, and we're going to create that at another moment. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to close this one. I'm going to jump over to create. Are there any questions with the creation of this first table? We took a little bit more time in the creation of the first table because it was the first one. I'm going to go a little bit quicker with the creation of the other ones. Any questions with the creation of the table?
Yes, I know you said we weren't able to do IT questions, but I'm trying to save it, and it says I'm only allowed to save only one auto number field per table. I don't know.
Oh, that's probably Ricardo because of the following. I'm going to open the employee table, and I'm going to go to the design view. check if you have, there should only be one data type that's auto number.
Okay. Only one?
Yes, because the auto number is a unique field where there's a number that's going to be created automatically every time I add a new record. So all of the tables can only have one field with an auto number. So check if you don't have another field here with auto number and just change that to number.
Okay, yeah, I had to.
Yeah. That's actually not a technical question, Ricardo. That's a valid question. Okay. When I mean technical questions, I mean I tried to save it and my computer crashed. I'm not going to be able to answer those, or whatever. But that's actually a very valid question. Ask those sorts of questions if that happens. So now it did let you save it, right?
Yes, but it's telling me that the employee birth date is not a valid name. And I copied it exactly as yours.
Just change the value there. I don't know.
And it happened again, and it wouldn't let me do anything. So I had to play with it, and I erased it out, and I rewrote it, and then it let me. So
that's something that you have to be very careful with, Ricardo, and what I mentioned. These sorts of programs that, again, have to do with many tables and things that are linked are very sensible to removing or deleting or updating things. They're extremely sensible to that. So be very careful when you delete something or you modify something. Be very careful how you do that because other things might be affected. Okay, so just check if you don't have the birth date repeated, because that's another thing. Remember that regarding normalizations, you can't have the same name of an attribute twice. If it persists, just give it another name, MB date 1 or whatever. Just give it another name because somehow it's checking. Somehow it's checking that. Somehow it's checking that the name is probably repeated. Okay, so be mindful of that. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to close this table, and I'm going to jump over and start creating the new tables. And to do that, I am going to go here to create. I'm going to go here to create, and I'm going to create a table. Okay, this is a new table that I'm going to create. I'm going to create a table. It's going to create the table here. And notice again, it's calling it table 1. It isn't giving me the option of a specific name. And it's opening it by default in datasheet view. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to switch over to design view. It's going to ask me for a name. The next table that I'm going to create is the department table. So I'm going to call it department. Okay. I'm going to go a little bit quicker now with the creation of the tables. Okay. But stop me if you have any questions. So this table has 3 attributes or 3 fields. That's department ID. I'm going to leave that as an auto number for now. That's the department ID. Then we've got the department name. That's going to be a short text. And then we've got the department manager social security number. This is going to be a number, and it's department manager social security number. Okay. And that's basically my department table. Okay. This is what I was mentioning. Be very careful with this. The department table is open. I haven't saved it, and it hasn't asked me to save it. If I open the employee table, notice that it opened it in datasheet view right next to the department one. And I can have as many things open here as Access is going to let me. And everything that's open is still active and modifiable. So one thing that I'm going to recommend to you guys to have as much order as possible is to try not to have many things open at the same time, because problems might arise. And when we start linking things, if I modify one thing in one table, it might affect other tables. And so we have to be very careful with that. So I'm just going to have one thing open, and I'm going to remember to save. So a Control S is important. And then I'm going to close this. Okay. I'm going to go to the next table. I'm going to create the project table. Okay. I'm going to go over here to move the zoom controls. I'm going to go over here to create table. Again, it opens the table in the data sheet view. I'm going to switch over to the design view, and this is going to be called project. And I've got 3 attributes, which is the project ID. This is going to be the key. It's an auto number. It's the project ID. Then we've got the project name. This is going to be a short text. It's a project name. And then we've got the department ID. This is going to be a number, and it's the department ID of the associated project. I am going to close this. Well, I'm going to save it first, and then I'm going to close it. Okay. Next table I'm going to create is the dependent table. Okay, create table. I'm going to switch to the design view. This is going to
Professor,
be
to save it, you just click the right.
Yes,
right click.
you can do a couple of things here, Estrella. You can, what I always do, Estrella, with all of my, when I'm working, I always do a Control S, Control S, Control S, Control S. Always when I modify something, Control S, that's automatically going to save everything. Or you can click here with the right mouse button, and there's a save option. Okay. And also you can go over here to the file and save. Okay. When I'm working, I always, when I'm working in any software, I always have my left hand with the Control S, Control S, Control S, Control S to always save every modification, because your computer might turn off, the software might crash, and you want to have the updated versions. So, okay, so I've got the dependent table. So it's first dependent ID. Remember that was a field that we added to remove the situation that it was a weak entity. Then the department name, dependent name. Then the dependent gender. And we're going to do something similar to the last thing we did. We're going to go over here to the lookup wizard. I want to type the values that I want. I'm going to say that it's male, female, transgender male, transgender female, nonconformant, other, and prefer not to indicate. I don't remember how we said it in the other one. Prefer not to indicate or something.
Respond?
Like that. Respond, I think it was. Yes, correct. Thank you. Sorry, prefer not to respond. Next, we're going to leave it like that and limit it to the list and finish up. This is going to be the dependent gender. And I believe the dependent relationship. Here I'm going to also go to the lookup wizard. I will type in the values that I want. And here, because of insurance purposes, this should also be either child, parent. I'm going to leave it child, parent, spouse. I'm going to leave those 3 options there. I'm going to limit it to the list. Click finish, and then also the employee department, the dependent relationship, and the dependent, the employee social security number. This is going to be a number, and this is going to be dependent, the employee dependent social security. So the employee that's associated with dependent. Okay. And we are going to save, and we're going to close, and we're going to do the last table, create table. And this table, I'm going to go to the design view. I'm going to call this table, this is going to be the employee project table. And this just has the employee social security number. Now, I'm not going to leave this as auto number because we're going to take that from another, table. Okay. This is not going to be auto created in this table. And this is the employee social security number. This is the employee that's working on the specific project. And then the project ID, this is also going to be a number, the project ID. And lastly, the employee project hours. This is going to be a number, project hours, employee project hours. Okay. Now, notice here something. This table has a composite primary key, meaning that the primary key is comprised of 2 attributes. So right now, the primary key is just 1 attribute. So what we're going to do is that we're going to select both of the fields. How do I select both of the fields? As I select any 2 fields in anything, I can just grab the mouse and drag it down to select both of them. I can select one of them, press Control, and then select the other one. Okay. So I'm just going to do this. I'm selecting both of them, and I'm going to click here the button on the left that says primary key. And so now both of them are primary keys, okay, together. That's the way I create a composite primary key. Okay. I'm going to save, and I'm going to close. Okay. Questions up to this point with the creation of the tables?
No questions.
No?
Nope.
Okay. So there is a couple of more steps that we need to do. I'm going to do those next session. They're actually very quick. I'm going to do those next session just to finish up this setup. But you can start doing this for your lab project. I'm sorry, for your lab exercise number 1. You can already start doing this, which is the creation of the tables. Okay, and there's just 2 quick steps that we need to do to finish up, and we'll be done next class with this. Okay, I recommend you start doing this because lab exercise 1 is for next Thursday, for next week. So you already have enough information to start doing that. And the last 2 steps that I'm going to do next Tuesday, you can see them in the videos that I've already uploaded. So you don't even have to wait till next Tuesday. Okay. So questions before we close up? No? Okay.
Professor,
yes, go
I
ahead.
do have a question, but it's kind of about the access. I don't find the email where they send us the.
That is a technical question. Let me just close this up and we'll talk about this.
Okay.
Okay.